This episode of RadCast Outdoors is brought to you by PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings.
Fish on! Hey, RadCast is on.
Hunting, fishing, and everything in between. This is RadCast Outdoors. Here are David Merrill and Patrick Edwards.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of RadCast Outdoors. I'm Patrick Edwards.
And I'm David Merrill.
Hey man, it is time for fall fishing season.
It is fall fishing season. If you haven't got your boat out in the water, got the dust off the reels, I don't know where you've been because, open water is the best water to fish by far.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it's been a good year, at least in Wyoming. It hasn't been oppressively hot, which has been great this summer. And the fishing has been delightful, and it's only going to get better as we transition into fall. Most people in the fall, they're petting their firearms and bows and getting ready for that. I'm getting my rods and reels geared up for fall fishing because fall fishing is my favorite.
We were just talking, I was showing off my rod and reel. I got a bow fishing setup, and we need to get the dust off of that one.
Go shoot some carp.
For sure. So to start out, if somebody's had their boat out, obviously they kind of know the routine, but probably should make sure. Same idea. Safety stuff is number one. Life jackets, whistle, fire extinguisher, horn.
Yeah.
Trailer wiring is always a bugger. Every time I hook to a different vehicle to go somewhere, it just seems like Murphy's Law.
That is a pet peeve of mine. Why is it such a pain in the rear? Because it's like, you pull a camper and it's like everything works good. And then you hook up a boat trailer and you're like, man, my running lights aren't on or whatever. I don't understand. But it's inevitable.
The headlights and taillights on your truck work every time.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally a bulb burns out, you replace it, and it's good for another couple years.
And you got to go check the fuse box and start testing all these fuses. Yeah,
it's back to that Patrick McManus. You're always 6 inches short of rope, and the test of a relationship is hooking and backing a trailer.
Oh, man. So that is one of the most entertaining things every year is when I go to the boat ramp. And I watch people struggle with that. By the way, if you're one of those people that struggles, I'm not making fun of you, but it is kind of entertaining to watch people back up their boat trailer.
I do have a tip and a trick for that, right? And it's, you have to do everything in reverse. So if you just grab the bottom of the steering wheel and you use your thumb as an arrow, right? Mm-hmm. Whichever way your thumb is pointing on the bottom of the steering wheel, that's the way the trailer's going to go. Or for me, what I found is just put your arm on the passenger seat, turn your head around, and just watch the trailer.
Yep.
And I can back up at 15 miles an hour, and you get a feel for, length and throw of each trailer is a little different. But
here's the other thing with that. If you're going to move your trailer at all, make sure your dogs and kids are out of the way, all your loved ones, anybody that could get hurt, because bad things do happen. So make sure that they're out of the way. But like on boat ramps especially, you have to pay attention because like at Boyson, it's a perfect example, Tough Creek, there's a beach right there by the boat ramp and little kids play in there. You have to be careful. You can't be, just flying back in there. If you're really good at backing in a boat, pay attention to what's going on because you don't want to hit a kid. But yeah, I mean, the other thing that gets overlooked on boats is the bearings. Make sure your bearings have been packed and greased and that everything is good to go because it sucks when you have a blowout and your bearing's bad and then your trailer, you're going to have to drop it and go into town and get some things and come back and try to fix it. It can be a real mess. So always make sure if you're doing a camper or a boat that you're getting your bearings packed and greased and make sure everything's ready to go. Make sure you have a spare too. Spares are important.
100% spares are very important. So we've talked a little bit about it. I'm getting ready to go fish a lake here in Wyoming out of the water ski boat. It's I guess we'll shall we let them know where I'm going?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm going to head up to Bull Lake, and right now the limit on lake trout is infinite. They want those pups out of there. I'm going to go harvest some meat, but we're going to go camp for a day or two and get an evening and morning and an evening fish in. So what are some things, besides making sure the boat's prepped, making sure rods and reels are prepped? I mean, the species I'm targeting is obviously lake trout, but there's going to be some browns in there. There's going to be some rainbows. What are some things I need to be bringing pertaining to catching fish?
Yep.
And what is some structure things and other things I should be looking at, paying attention to water, weather? So I know it's a big open-ended question, but if somebody else out there, and they should be able to take and interpret this towards their specific species they're targeting.
Yeah. So first of all, let's talk about what most fish do this time of year. So we are in mid-August. It's hot. Fish typically this time of year are looking to cool down just a little bit, especially here in Wyoming. Most of them are cool to cold water species, so that you're going to have to look a little bit deeper most of the time. Early morning, maybe not so much, but as the day wears on, certainly they're going to be deeper, including walleye, lake trout, all those things. But going to Bull Lake, one thing I would do is I would reach in and get the arsenal of PK lures, because the spoon bite on fall fish is phenomenal. And it doesn't matter whether you're going after a walleye, a lake trout, a brown trout, they're going to hit all of it. So I would take the gold, the copper, the nickel on the flutterfish and the PK spoons, because they like that, kind of flashy stuff this time of year. I would also take, the red dot glow that everybody loves and the fire tiger glow. But fishing at Bull Lake, one of the things you can do is you can actually cast up towards the structure. It drops off pretty fast, and work that spoon as it falls.
So just fish it as it's falling.
And drop. Yep, rip and drop as it's falling. You'll notice with those lake trout, your lure will stop. So you'll see it coming down. You have to kind of pay attention to your line, because they'll bite when you're not paying attention. It'll be fluttering down, all of a sudden it'll stop. You better set the hook fast, because otherwise they're going to spit it back out. Green is also a great color up there. I always tell people to take the fire tiger and the fire tiger glow, because green works on lake trout. It does just about everywhere I've fished them, and white. So that red dot glow is a good color too. The other thing,
inlets, outlets, middle of the lake, just where the structure is, anywhere in between.
I'd be looking for structure adjacent to deep water, because that's where they're going to be hanging out. The other thing you might do to increase your odds, because they may be a little finicky, is get some cut sucker, which, by the way, I know a supplier for sucker meat if you want some, but get some cut sucker meat. You can tip just a little bit. You don't have to do much. And what I like to do is cut it into strips for a couple of reasons. One, it doesn't get your treble hook too gummed up with too much stuff. You want to have good hookups, right? But you also can create a little bit of action, because what that spoon does when you're constant retrieving it, or when you're ripping it, it works that treble hook back and forth, kind of like a dog's tail wagging. And if you have a piece of meat, like a little strip about quarter of an inch or a little skinnier if you can, wide, flopping off the back, it looks like a tail.
How long?
I usually go about 1 inch to 2 inches. That's all you need. You don't need much.
It makes a lot of sense to me to have that little tail on there. It makes a lot of sense.
Scent's a big deal to trout. People don't realize trout rely on their sense of smell a lot, almost as much as catfish. It's crazy how much they, relay scent to, hey, that's something I can eat. And that's why when we ice fish, typically we're tipping our treble hooks with that as well, because, minnow heads, minnow bodies, a lot of our lakes, you can't fish live minnows. So like if you're check your regulations, but minnows are great. Sucker meat's great, just because it gives that scent. Again, if you can take that strip of meat and make it look like a tail or something with some action, you're typically going to increase your odds of catching a fish.
So you mentioned that those fish are going to be chasing that deeper, colder water. I imagine kind of like we do in the afternoon here. It's hot. I'm going to go find a shady spot. I'm not just going to be out in the full-blown sun. How about the bite? Is it going to, my experience, off-water, salmonoids, whatever, mornings and evenings are always better than midday. Is that going to be typical what you find on a lake?
Yeah, and it depends on the species, but I would say trout, as a general rule, are going to bite better early and late, but they also bite during the middle of the day. Sometimes you'll have killer lake trout bites right in the middle of the day. And I know our lake trout people who are listening are nodding their heads, because, they can get down in that thermocline, get down to that cooler water, and, just get below the thermocline even, and you can work those fish and catch them all day long because they're comfortable. And if they're hungry,
like with elk, if they're really, really active at midnight, we're talking, they weren't very active in the evening. All of a sudden it gets dark. They get super active. You can hear them screaming out your tent all night. And then all of a sudden it's like somebody turned the spigot off when the sun come up.
Yep.
Midday, those elk are going to, because they went to bed is what happened.
Take a nap.
They get up and they go, you know what, I'm going to stretch my legs and go get a bite to eat. And most guys have gone back to the trailer and they're sleeping at noon. I've killed my biggest bull, at noon.
Remember what Bill Siementhal talked about. He said hunting and fishing are basically the same things, just one's underwater. Well, fish are no different. Like the moon phases do have an effect. I still haven't figured out exactly the effect, but there is one. Like, so I'll give walleye as an example. When you have a full moon phase going on, typically they're biting all night long. They're out hunting, doing their thing. And then during the day, sometimes it's a little slower. And so it's kind of the same thing as elk, right? If the moon's out, they're feeding. And then during the day, they're bedded down, they're taking a nap.
I focus on setting my archery elk hunt up around the moon, right? And I hunt during the full moon too, but I'm just basically filling time until that moon goes away. And it is, I mean, it's like somebody turns a switch on and all of a sudden, you know, and you've been there fishing the same spot, the same lure, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. You had a few bites at 8, nothing at 9, 10. Then all of a sudden 10:30 rolls on and it's fish on, fish on, fish on.
It's maddening to me. Sometimes I'll show it up at a walleye spot at like 3 or 4 in the morning and I'll catch a couple. And then from 6 to 6:15, it's as fast as I can cast. You know, they're hitting and then shuts off again. So I'm talking about fishing from the bank, right?
Yes.
Like it's just there's that open window where they move in, they feed hard, and they move back out. And that's something that happens in the fall that a lot of people don't realize is that fish are coming in. I'll give walleye as an example. If you're going to do fall fishing, because this is a fall fishing episode, if you're going to fall fish, walleye fishing in the fall is the best time of the year, in my opinion. Because you're going to catch bigger fish because, you know, they've spawned early in the spring. They're starting to grow those egg sacs back. They start to bulk up a little bit and they're on the feed getting ready for winter. What happens in most of our western reservoirs is you'll have walleyes chasing emerald shiners and shad. And what happens with emerald shiners and shad, again, you have to know what the bait's doing to catch the fish that are pursuing the bait, is they start to school up pretty hard. And so you'll see millions, and I'm not exaggerating, millions of emerald shiners, millions of shad suspended out in the deeper water during the day. And then they'll move in at night along like rock faces and cliffs. Guess where the walleyes are? They're right there with them. They're following that bait. They're going to eat until they can't eat anymore. And I've had times in the fall where I'll catch like a 19, 20 inch walleye. Sometimes, you know, some of the bigger walleyes, they'll be throwing up emerald shiners and crappie because the crappie are also following the emerald shiners. And so you'll pick them up and there's just all these fish just start spewing out of their mouth. And you're like, how did you even eat my lure? You know, this is insane that you're eating this much. But you got to understand that as these fish come out of summer, they're on like hyperdrive in summer. They're feeding because it's warm. They're getting ready for fall. Fall kind of starts that transition of they really pack it on because they're like, man, winter is coming. Kind of like we're doing right now. We're
it's no different than horses, bears or nor different
firewood,
than us. Yep.
We're getting harvest, you know, all these things. We're getting ready for winter too. Well, the fish are no different. They're getting ready. We have to understand that as anglers and as hunters, right? What are the animals doing to prep for winter? Well, in the case of walleyes, lake trout, they're eating like crazy and you can catch a ton of fish. And the nice thing about fall, no offense to the hunters, but when you guys are out in the field, I got a lot more elbow room on the lakes and reservoirs and rivers, right? So I can go out and I can catch more fish. So it's actually pretty advantageous if you are the person who's like an avid angler, or maybe you've tagged out, grab your fishing rod, you know, head down to your favorite river, lake, stream, figure out what the bait are doing, because then you're going to find out what the walleyes, what the lake trout, what the rainbows, what the browns, whatever they're doing, you're going to figure it out.
We're getting ready to go get firewood this weekend, all weekend. I think we're going to throw a couple rods and reels in. There's a couple streams around. I think we can get the kids on some brookies for an evening. So you just inspired me to, you know, we're going on a mission of I want firewood. And after last winter, if you guys have been around, you heard about it. It was brutal, and I ran out of wood not once, not twice, but 3 times. How do you run out of wood 3 times? Well, I'd go get a pickup load, burn through it, thinking that, hey, we got enough to make it, and be borrowing, and stealing another pickup load. So,
but yeah, the fall fishing is absolutely phenomenal. There's no reason that you can't take your kids. It's usually a nice time of year too, because you can throw on a hoodie, some jeans, go down to the body of water and fish and be comfortable. And you can fish late. That's the cool thing is like, you know, go on a Friday night. You can go out and you can fish walleye from, you know, 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, you know, until 10, 11, 12 at night, and just enjoy the crisp, clean air, the stars in the sky, you know, catching some fish. And I've taken you and done this, and it's really fun. It's like if you're fishing like a suspending crank along some rocks, and what you do is you basically do a couple of retrieves and then kind of twitch your lure a couple times and just let it sit there, and then you feel that walleye come up or that big trout and just grab it and yank it the other way.
They almost yanked the rod out of your hand.
It's so much fun, isn't it?
The only thing that's more exciting than that is when the metal sign behind you falls off the chain and clangs down the rocks, and you think
you
it's
jumped 10 feet in the air on that one.
I thought a pickup would come over the bank and was rolling down the hill on top of me.
Oh man,
it was good funny. Times.
Yeah,
I don't think it was as funny as you do, but
oh man, it was great.
so for the listeners out there,
ones.
There was about a 3x4 foot metal sign that said something. I don't care what it says anymore, but it was hanging on one chain,
and it fell.
2 T-posts, and we're down there at midnight, 1 o'clock, fishing for walleye, and any second you can have the rod ripped right out of your hand. So you're on high alert,
you're keyed in,
and we got headlights kind of on, but not really. There was just enough light that you could sort of see what you're doing. And so I'm keyed in, I'm ready to go, and all of a sudden, I mean, it was like 10 pots and pans clanging behind me 5 feet, and I think I did. I jumped, and I might have said an expletive or two. I was animated for quite a while after that.
That's all right. It was fun, and some crazy things happen when you fish in the fall too. Like, I think of different friends that I've taken out, we go catch walleyes, go catch these big trout. One time I took Seth out there and we were fishing late at night, and he's like, "Oh, I got one." And his line took off from the water up into the air. And what had happened was an owl had come in and grabbed his lure and took off with it. I have never seen that in my life. That was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. This big old owl, big great horned owl, comes down, snatches his lure and takes off, and thank goodness it came off. It let go of the hook, because can you imagine trying to unhook a really cranky great horned owl from your line? No, thank you. So, those things are vicious.
Statute of limitations is passed, but we did a lot of trolling on Strawberry and Flaming Gorge as a kid. Mm-hmm. And Grandma threw a worm out on a line. I think it was on pop gear, but she threw it out instead of just, right? And the seagull dove in and went after it, and gobbled it down, got hooked. And I'll never forget her reeling that line with that pop gear, and here's this kite behind us of a seagull. I believe the seagull got released, but it wasn't happy, and it wasn't good. However, it was quite comical.
Yeah, I had that happen to me when I was in high school. A group of buddies of mine, we went up to a little trout lake outside of Cheyenne, and I was fishing this smaller minnow style crankbait, and seagull came down and grabbed it, and that was not very fun trying to get him unhooked. He was very upset, but he was fine. He flew away. His feelings were hurt, but it was not enjoyable trying to unhook it. And I had that going through my mind, but thinking great horned owl, big talons, chompy beak. I'm like, oh no. But luckily it went away, so we were all right. But Seth, he was like trying to figure out what the heck happened, because he felt something, so he sets the hook, and then all of a sudden his line is going in the air, and he's
in
like,
the dark, in the air.
So,
wait a second.
And another time I was fishing and I caught a bat. So, I mean, you're out at night, right?
Yep.
And early in the fall, the bats are still around. You can see them flying around doing their thing. And anyway, I throw out and I'm reeling in, and I feel this tension on my line. I'm like, what the heck is going on? Well, what had happened was a bat had flown into my line, like into the actual line part that was just over the water, and had wrapped his wing around it or something. He hit it hard. So I reel him in, and these bats just flopping all over the place. But yeah, you do the weirdest things in the fall. But I will say it is one of the prettiest and most enjoyable times to go fishing, because I mean, it's so comfortable outside. Typically the wind's not howling like in the springtime, because I love spring fishing too. Spring fishing can be amazing.
You got cabin fever and you're out there in open water.
It's still typically pretty cold, right? And you also get the wind with the transition of the season, and sometimes rain, and it can be just a little bit more miserable. But fall fishing is phenomenal. And when you're up at Bull Lake, it's going to be gorgeous. You may, well, it's probably too early to hear the elk, but like I know some people go up there in the fall, they listen to the elk bugle, they fish. You know, those are the kind of things that I look forward to in the fall. The fishing is phenomenal. And I am going to go target, obviously, the big walleyes, the big trout in the fall. And then this year, also the big sauger. There's a couple of places where I have access, which is great because a lot of the places where I want to go for big sauger, you have to know somebody, right? And I have some guys that are going to let me fish. But man, there's nothing better than fishing. And I'm going to run through some of these, but like that suspending crankbait, that is so much fun. You know, I typically using like an X-Wrap or a Smithwick Rogue, something like that suspends.
And because most of those predatory fish, they're going to lay in the bottom of the structure in an ambush position. They're going to be looking up.
Yep.
And when they see, sometimes it's just the shadow of that suspending crank coming over, they're going to explode and come up, and they're going to hone in on it just like, you know, a bird honing in on a bait in the sky, and they're going to take it out.
Well, and Bill Siemantel talked about this too on his podcast is, you know, we got millions of emerald shiners swimming by, and they're all 1 to 2 inches long. If you throw a 4.5 inch, 5 inch, 6 inch crankbait, and I'm not exaggerating here, it stands out. And so when those fish, those walleye are keying in on what they're going to hit and eat, you better have something bigger, you know, because you can try to match the hatch and you can throw really small stuff, but your catch rate goes way down. If you have something that casts a bigger shadow, to your point, has a bigger profile, makes a little bit more noise, you're going to catch more fish and you're going to catch bigger fish, which is always the goal for me, right? You want to catch more and bigger ones. And those walleyes really key in, at least in my experience, they key in on the 4.5 to 6 inch lures. And sometimes I catch 19 inch walleye that have an 8 inch trout in their stomach. So it's not like an 8 inch trout is too big. So an 8 inch lure is not too big either. So just something to think about when you start gearing up and heading out.
So one thing to talk about back on the safety aspect, we've talked about it already, but that journey management is just as important fishing as hunting, right? Especially if you're doing a late night adventure somewhere, you know, because if you're not back, you need to trigger the emergency response like we talked about. Is there some other safety things to think about?
Yep. So one that really gets overlooked, and I am not perfect at this, but something you should do is always wear eye protection. Everybody thinks about it during the sunny parts of the day, you got sunglasses on. Well, when you're fall fishing, get some clear safety glasses and have them on at night. And people are going to say, well, that's stupid, you're a sissy. Well, fine, I'm a sissy, but I'm going to have both of my eyeballs. You know, because what'll happen is sometimes, you know, you'll be fishing those crankbaits or whatever, you're pulling on a good sized fish, those big walleye and trout, when they go to thrashing their head around, sometimes that lure pops loose, and guess where it goes?
It's right at your face.
Right at your face, right over your head, right over your shoulder. And if you're fishing with other people, you don't control how they cast. You don't control how they're pulling their rod against the fish. That thing can end up, you know, dug right into your eyeball, into your face.
We've talked about this
watch for
on the Kenai River, especially, right? Everybody's running ounce and a half weights. And when you lose a fish on that river, you know, you're talking 20-pound test line that's stretched tight. I have seen more than one eyeball lost on that river. So anymore, we go down with safety glasses, sunglasses, and we look a little goofy on the river because nobody else is wearing them. But I'll tell you, after seeing somebody get a large salmon hook through their eye, that's not an experience I want to deal with.
And just the thought of it sends shivers down my spine, and I'm sure it does for our listeners because it's brutal and it can happen. But if you have kids especially, you really got to watch for that. You know, like, you want to protect your kids and you want to protect their eyeballs. Make sure that you have some kind of eye protection. The other thing too, have good pliers, you know, so that you can properly unhook fish.
Some of those suspending cranks have 2 treble hooks on them.
3.
And trying to get that second one out with the flopping fish around, if you don't have good pliers, you're going to run the first one in your hand somewhere. And that's speaking from experience with no pliers.
I got to tell you this story. Danny's not around anymore, but he told me this story. He was fishing Pathfinder Reservoir when he was living in Casper in the fall. And up there, like a Rebel crawdad off of some of the rocky structure there works great. And so he's fishing this one night in the fall, catching walleye. He was on like his 4th or 5th one, pulling it up to the bank, went to grab it to unhook it. It flopped. It was a decent one, you know, and it kind of flopped out of his hand. And guess what? That second treble hook from that Rebel crawdad got buried into the tendon just above his thumb.
So now he's got a fish on one end of the treble hook.
Yeah.
Him on the other end of the treble hook, lure in the middle, And the fish is still flopping.
That is not fun. So he basically took his pliers, knocked the fish out, unhooked the fish, then clipped, the lure off, then had to drive down to Casper and get it removed because it was buried into the tendon in his thumb. So it is important to make sure that you have, some things to take care of yourself. Again, a landing net so that you don't have that happen is great, because what you can do is you can scoop the fish up. So I'm assuming you're shore fishing here. So you step down, kind of bend down, put the net under the fish, lift it up, let it flop around for a minute, then let it relax. Then take your pliers in your other hand, grab that treble hook and just shake them loose and get that lure out of there. Get that lure away from you. That's the last thing you want to have dug into your thigh, your finger, your face, anywhere in your body. Those of us who've been hooked know how much fun hooks are. So you do that, you mitigate the risk, then you can handle the fish. It's no problem, right? So if you're going to release it, great. Just dip the net back in the water and let them go. Or, pick them up, put them on the stringer, do what you got to do. But
same thing with broadheads when you're hunting.
Yeah.
If you've been lucky enough to be successful on an animal, you need to find the rest of that broadhead, because the last thing you want to be doing is processing it and find it. And they go in places you wouldn't think. So when you find it, put it back in your quiver, put it away. Same thing we've talked about. Back to the netting, I have shown you the video. Make sure that person netting the fish can lift the net up. There's been more than one or two tenuous, strenuous friendships dissolved because of a missed fish being netted. So the net man is the stressful part. The guy rod and reel, that is stress. But
I would rather reel in fish all day long than be the guy trying to net the fish, for especially a big one, for somebody else, because there's so much pressure. It's like, oh crap. It's like, if I lose this 30-inch walleye, that person's going to be ticked at me.
Something that we can talk a little bit about, and this is coming from, hundreds of salmon netted in Alaska, right, is a lot of what I see is guys try and net the fish too early.
Yeah.
When the fish is still green, right? So let that fish run a couple times. And with salmon, especially a big king salmon, right, realistically, you want to get that fish up on top of the water planing, and you kind of want to water ski him towards the net. And then the netter kind of needs to have the net needs to go dive under the fish in the water, right? And then start scooping up. And really, you don't want to let tension off. But if you quit water skiing the fish, right, you just water ski it towards the boat, and then you kind of momentarily pause, and then the net goes under the water and comes up. The fish is just kind of suspended there, like doesn't know what it's going to do, and it's not under its own power. But if you're bringing a fish in, that's still under its own power towards you, and then you push a net in the water, it's going to go away from the net every time. Of course.
Well, the other part of that too is, if you are the net man, you better be having some eye protection on as well. There's been several times where people are water skiing the fish to me, and that hook pops loose, and guess where? That lure comes straight at my face, because I'm trying to get
the rod's aimed at you.
Yeah, it's aimed at me. So I've been hit by rods too. That's painful.
The worst one I ever did, I foul hooked a fish in Kenai and had it and lost it. It popped off and went above my head and landed up on the bank, right? Like, if you guys know what flossing is, you have 15 feet of line or so out. So it's 15 feet up the bank behind me. Well, I just went to flick the rod and flick it back out in the water, right? That weight hit me somewhere right in the back of the head. And oh man, to this day, I can still feel the sting of, and I did it to myself. And it was a quick flip of the rod to get it, out there.
Ouch.
Yeah. So.
Oh, the other part about being the net man. So if you are going to plunge that net under the fish, make sure you plunge it under the fish and not on the fish. Because I've had some people knock my fish off, and I'm like, really? Come on. Well, and they're like, I was trying to get it under. I'm like, yeah, you just knocked it off.
The video quality is not very good. It's cell phone quality from early 2010, but we do have the salmon video that I think will I am finally ready to share it. The net person was my wife, and we are still married, but that was a moment that was a close one. To this day, it's taken over 10 years for me to attempt to get over the loss of that fish.
That is painful. There's been a few times I know where I didn't have a landing net. So here's something for fall. There's been several times in the fall I've had probably the 26 to 30 inch class walleye right up to the bank. and I reach down to grab them, and they shake their head, and they come loose, and they swim off. That is
And you didn't have a net. You were just
painful.
trying to beach them, right?
Yes, that is painful. Just get a decent landing net. Make sure it's big enough to handle the fish that you're after. If you're going after 30-inch walleye, you better have a net that's big enough to handle them. Otherwise, you may have other problems where they fall out of your net, or they get the hook caught on the netting and that pulls it loose.
That's 100% what happens. That fish was in the net, and we're talking,
it's terrible.
It's a 45-inch net, and it's a 42-inch fish, right?
Yep.
So the net was big enough, but barely. The fish flops in the net. The net doesn't really get lifted up because it's a 45, 50-pound fish, and the hook got caught in the net, and the fish swam away. So it was a nice catch and release, but I would have liked to hold it before I let it go, just for a picture maybe.
Just for a picture. But, it happens. I do want to talk about a couple of other things that hardly ever get talked about on podcasts, but for fall fishing, this is key. If you are going to fish like a suspending crankbait, tuning your lure is important. And so what do I mean by tuning? And I'm not talking about music. What I'm talking about is it needs to be able to swim properly through the water, and it also needs to suspend properly. So it's unfortunate, but there are many different baits that out of the box don't quite do what they're supposed to do. So I'll give you an example. Smithwick Rogues. I love them. I catch lots of really big fish on them, but typically right out of the box, they run funny. So they'll run to the right or to the left. And what it is it's that little piece on the very front end of the lure that
in front of the eye that you tie to.
You have
the bill or the lip of the lure.
Yeah, there's like a little metal piece that is molded into the plastic. And then you have a split ring, which is what you tie to. Well, that little piece of metal that molds into the plastic is typically just a tiny bit off. And so they make these tools. They're called lure tuners. They're basically, it's like a cylinder with a notch cut out in the end where you can put that over that metal and kind of bend it back into place. Be gentle, because some lures you will ruin if you start wrenching on it too hard. But the easiest thing to do, take your lure out of the box, get it tied on, take about 3 or 4 feet of line off the rod tip, and then put it in the water and just kind of work that lure. Just kind of sweep your arm, and you'll see how that lure is working. You'll see if it'll come up to the left, come up to the right, and then you just have to tune it accordingly. The other thing you need to do is kind of cast it out about 10 feet, reel it down a little bit, and see if it suspends. If it starts to come back up, or if it sinks, you've got a problem. If it sinks, I don't know what to tell you, because you can't put anything on it to really float it. But if it's coming up in the water column and you want it to hang, here's a little trick that I was taught many years ago that works really, really well. Is about midway at the bait. So like if it's a rogue, about the middle hook area, or maybe even the front hook area, just clip on like a heavier snap swivel and then put it back out there and see what it does. Because it's not going to affect the hookup rate. It doesn't really get in the way, but you can hook it right underneath the bait where that treble hook and split ring tie on to the bait. It makes a huge difference.
Just adding a touch of weight. Yeah, so it's too buoyant, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So if you need to kind of weight it down, you can there's different products with these like little sticky things that are made of zinc that you can stick on the bait that'll help kind of weigh it down. I've always found a snap swivel, a bigger
them
one.
handy.
Yeah, just throw it on there. Works really well. Throw 2 on there if it's
going to make a little extra noise.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt anything. And Danny taught me that years ago. He's like, man, you don't need those fancy dots, because I bought some of these things you put on the lure to tune them. And he's like, just do this. And he showed me. I'm like, oh, I should have been doing that a long time ago. But
that's awesome.
It really does help, because when you are fishing like walleye in the fall, it's important to really suspend that bait and just let it sit there, because those fish are watching that thing and they're like, oh, he stopped. I'm going to eat him. Then they'll come up, they'll crack it. And so sometimes in the fall, you can pause the lure for just a second and you got a fish hitting. Sometimes I can count up to 10 and then the fish will grab it. So you also have to mess around with your retrieve a little bit. I always just start with the faster, more aggressive, and then work my way to, a little slower retrieve. But always start with the aggressive first and work your way down. But there's some fine tuning there.
Is there any difference when you're trolling, tuning a lure, than when you're like from the shore?
Yeah, trolling is the same kind of thing. What I do with trolling is I just let it hang off the side of the boat, get it out in the water a little ways back, and you can watch. Like like the PKs, I have really good luck with PKs. I don't usually have to tune them at all, but like the ridgeline, you can throw it out behind the boat and you can kind of watch. And if it's kind of moving to one side or the other, again, tune it just a little bit. But man, those things run really, really great out of the box.
So basically the eye isn't lined up with the center body line of the lure. And so as you're pulling, it's
moving one side or the other.
Yeah, and so you're just tweaking that eye just ever so slightly.
Yeah, it goes back to that path of least resistance. It's going to move that way. And so you just have to tune it in so it's even on both sides, and then you get that nice wobble that you want. I will say this about the ridge lines in the fall. If you want to have a really fun day, go to, if you're in Wyoming or another state that has like big rainbow trout, go troll those early in the morning in the fall for rainbows. Oh my gosh.
What kind of speed are we talking about trolling?
Like 2 to sometimes as fast as 3 miles an hour. But man, those trout, they are ferocious. I mean, they come up and they smack those things. They'll come out of the water. It's exciting. And it's really fun if you're trolling and you're holding the rod. You don't have them in the rod holders, but you're actually holding it and you feel that fish come up and hit it. It is exciting. One of my favorite colors to use in the fall is the baby bass. So if you get the ridgeline crankbait, get the baby bass color. That thing catches walleye all summer too, by the way. If you want to troll them in the summer, it's a great walleye lure. But man, those fall trout just hammer it. And you can fish those. I've caught some of my biggest walleye on the PK ridgeline at night. The hard thing about it is the ridgelines sink. So they're a lipped crankbait and they sink. So you have to factor that in. And if you're fishing around rocks, it can get gnarly pretty quick. But it's kind of cool because if they're holding a little bit deeper, like if it's earlier in the evening, you can't pause it, right? Because it's going to sink. But you can cast it out really far into the deep water and count it down and get it down, 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 down into the water column and then start retrieving and working it back. Man, I have caught some really nice trout and really nice walleye doing that in the fall.
So you're kind of subtly sinking. Nobody's really noticing it's moving. It's just like a pebble hit the water and it's just sinking. And then all of a sudden it's a fish just taking off.
Yep. And they love to eat them. I've caught some absolute giants that way. The other PK lure that I would be using in the fall too is that spinner jig. I've got some monster walleye on that spinner jig. It's got a little prop blade up above the jig head that spins, gives it just a little bit more action, especially under a full moon. That thing works amazing.
Well, I'm going to start with flutterfish on the bottom, flutterfish working the structure down.
Yep.
And I'm going after pups. I'm going to go.
Oh, you're going to
maybe I'll get one that's not a pup. But even if we just go get a bunch of pups on the rod and reel, and we might do a little bit of trolling for some trout, and we'll take some PK ridgeline stuff. And the water ski boat doesn't have a troll motor, but what I found is I'm going to throw a 5-gallon bucket out on either side, tie it to the hooks, and we can get it at idle. We can get it down to that 2.5. And it's the boat I have, so it's the boat we're taking.
And that's the thing, like being innovative like that, a drift sock or buckets, it works really well, man. You can slow it down. I mean, just kick it out in neutral, just out of neutral, tie those off on the back. Yeah, you can do really well trolling that way. And those PK ridgelines, they troll great. I would put 2 on planer boards, get them out to the right and the left away from the boat, and then have 2 back behind. Put it back about 100 feet. You'll catch fish. I mean, they are phenomenal trolling lure.
So when I do catch fish, when we're most of my fishing experience is Oregon, Alaska, super cold water, and usually January or even June, July. It's still. We'd catch a bunch of salmon. We put them on a stringer. They're in 45, 50 degree water, right? That water is super cold. So something to think about, and something you've taught me here is, you're not just going to pull a bunch of walleye, a bunch of trout, a bunch of Lakers, a bunch of browns up in the boat, throw them in the bottom of the boat and troll around the rest of the day. You're going to brain them. You're going to bleed them. You can either put them on a stringer on the side of the boat, leave them in the water if you're trolling, or ideally a cooler with some ice, and that's going to make a huge difference in the quality of the fish that you either smoke or prepare or cook and put on the table.
Yeah, this time of year, I would highly recommend that. The water temperatures are in the 70s, so I mean it's too warm to put the fish back in the water. It's kind of like shooting an antelope and throwing it in the back of the truck. So trout especially, they degrade really quick. I mean, just like an antelope, the quality of the meat goes downhill in a hurry. So what I've really tried to do, and this is thanks to Hank Shaw and Doug Stange, you can go back and listen to those episodes. They talk about really premium fish care. Like if you really want to care for that catch and you want to make it taste as good as possible, have the best texture as possible, catch the trout, smack them in the head, bleed them in the water. Okay. So it could be in your live well, typically I'll fill the live well up, bleed them in that, and then put them in an ice slurry. So basically take a cooler, fill it halfway with ice, then fill water up to the top of the ice so it's a nice slurry. You put those fish in there, they're going to be perfectly cared for. And then when you get home, you can fillet them out, do whatever you're going to do with them. Maybe you're just going to gut them and cook them, but get them filleted out, get them cleaned up, and that's going to be as good a quality fish as you get. Because if you leave them in that warm water, they already start to get bacteria and start to do their thing and start to turn kind of nasty. I'll tell you, man, it's been a game changer for me, and people are going to roll their eyes. But I mean, I even tried that with carp this spring, and it makes a huge difference. People will still shake their head and say carp are disgusting. You don't know until you've tried, because I said that for years, having not even tried to consume them. My son and I went in May, caught some nice ones, did that full fish care thing.
Slurried them.
Yep, and smoked them, and they taste like a fish version of smoked ham. They taste so good. I was amazed at the quality. So, I mean, you can take fish that maybe people think are less desirable. Some people are like, I don't like catfish. Well, if you take care of catfish, they taste great. It's really, I think just about any fish that I'm starting to really agree with this line of thought, is that any fish that you catch is probably going to taste good if you take care of it. So
everybody turns their nose up in Alaska, pollock or humpies, pinks, right? I'll tell you, a fresh silver humpy, you take it home, put it right over the fire right then, it's good.
Delicious.
It's a good canning fish. Now, it doesn't hold up, the meat doesn't hold up to freezing like your king salmon, and it doesn't have the fat content that if you're smoking it like some of the other fish do. But pollock, I mean, we were on Kodiak this spring, and
it's good stuff.
I was trying to get halibut. Well, the bait fish had come in. The whales were in chasing the bait fish. Well, guess what else came in? The pollock. And you could not get your lure to the bottom before you were hooked up with a 12-pound cod. Oh, we caught 25, 30 of them in an afternoon, and we tried 10 spots over about a 8-mile period. We'd buzz over here 2 miles and down to 100 feet of water. And we were either getting zero fish, and the halibut, I'm sure, were chasing those same bait fish. I'm sure of it. And so we just couldn't get, they were there. Yeah. We just couldn't get through the schools, pollock down to the halibut. So I have a goal in life. It is to catch some big old halibut out of my own boat. And
it'll happen.
It'll happen. So,
but yeah, the fish care is critical, especially August. It's just like antelope. If you shoot an antelope early September or August, it's going to be really tough to take care of that meat. So just come prepared.
It's not impossible.
Yeah,
a little bit of pre-planning, and it makes for a much better product at the end.
Well, and I think it honors the fish and the antelope better if you really try to maximize it, right? Like,
that was my thought. Is if you're just going to go, hook a limit of rainbow, and you're going to throw them in the bottom of the Lund until you get home, and then I got to clean those fish. Catch them and release them, man. They'll be there next time when you're, and wait till colder temperatures. Same thing with antelope. If you're not gonna go the lengths of, I cringe when I see somebody, they shoot an antelope, they throw it in a truck, they drive it to a processor, they drag it out of the back of the processor and throw it on the floor, and it's nothing to buy. You don't have to buy a big fancy Yeti cooler. You can get a Coleman cooler from Walmart.
From Walmart that works just fine.
And you get 4 bags of ice. You go out antelope hunting, and you know what? You didn't get one today. It's not a big deal to buy 4 more bags of ice tomorrow.
Yep. And you'll appreciate the meat much more if you take care of it, believe me. And same thing with trout. If you catch, a bunch of nice trout and smoke them up, they're going to taste a lot better. So
a tip that I've seen you use and a lot of other people use, milk jugs. Everybody has milk jugs.
Yep.
Freeze a couple of those. Throw those in your cooler.
Yep.
You can hose them off if you've got like a bait freezer, like some of us trappers do, where we've got, all sorts of surprises are in my chest bait freezer. just don't go in that freezer. That's not for human consumption. But if you throw those jugs in there, refreeze them. Now I'm not going to store buying ice. I'm just having to do a little teeny bit of prep forethought of grabbing a couple gallons of frozen ice. And that's what we use for our antelope. Because why? It's free.
Yeah. And it works well. And I mean, there's no reason, like if you have an ice maker at home, you can't bag your own ice too. Get some garbage bags and fill them with ice. It's not that hard. It takes a week. Your ice maker will keep popping it out. You just keep adding it to that ice bag that's in your freezer. It works really great. I do like to have ice itself for fish just because, the jugs, they work well up to a point, because what happens is the jugs kind of thaw out. And so you have water kind of between the ice now and the plastic and then the other water. And you don't get as much of the cooling, but you do get some. And so, yeah, I do have that. I have several of those, and I like to bring some actual ice too. It really makes a big difference. And I have an ice maker, so I try to take that tray, put it in a bag, and just keep doing that for days and days until I acquire enough ice, but yeah, fish carrier.
What I will say for the antelope is you want to keep it dry, right? That's where the jugs work really well.
Yeah, for sure.
You get the cooler cold enough. You've got the thermal mass that the warm antelope won't just melt the ice right away. And even as it starts to melt, you don't get wet meat. So
no, that's perfect. Yeah, it's just a little different for fish, but yeah, I mean the idea is the same though. You got to get them cold.
Get them cold and do it now and get them bled and get them brained. And we do that in Alaska with all the fish. It's as simple as, we've got the video of making the caribou horn fish whacker. You whack them and then you reach in there. Now I have found that for whatever reason, and I've just been using my fingers forever to gill salmon, they've got a lot of bacteria on their gills, and you start getting little nicks and stuff.
And then your fingers swell up and they hurt.
Yeah, and now I'm kind of almost allergic to it because I've been having that much level of exposure. So I have to either use something, needle nose pliers, something.
Pliers work great.
I no longer use my fingers because I have to go home and if this does happen to you, I've found soaking my hands in a sink full of hydrogen peroxide will kill that bacteria on your hands, kind of clean up your cuts. It hurts, but I mean, my hands get to where they're so swole up that I can't hardly. And it didn't the first couple of years, Patrick, that I was up there doing hundreds of salmon with people a year. It didn't bother me. Now I'm like, no, not ripping that gill with my finger. Now it needs to get, you gotta bleed that fish. I don't like using a fillet knife on the river down where we're at just because of, hey, you got other people's flopping fish and hooks and lines. And so needle nose pliers.
Needle nose are great because like I use the longer needle nose, and it works great because you can hold the fish behind their head, take the needle nose and whack them in the head with it, then grab them, flip them belly side up, grab those gills, yank them, start to bleed them, put them in the water. But you got to put
them back in the water. If you're going to bleed them, there's another trip.
Be in the water.
You can't just yank the gills and throw it in the bottom of the boat. They've got to circulate water to circulate that blood out of the meat. And there is a significant difference in the quality of the meat of a fish that's been bled and not. And if you guys don't believe us, go ahead the next time you catch two rainbows, brain and bleed one, don't bleed the other. When you're filleting it, you'll be like, oh, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah, it's a lot cleaner process when you've bled them. The other thing about that, to David's point, is the coagulation happens immediately if you don't put them back in the water. So you'll pull that gill and it'll bleed a little bit. You'll get this clump of blood, but then it stops because just like you and I, we have coagulation agents in our blood, and when it hits the air, it coagulates and it stops the bleed. So if you put them in the water, it does not coagulate, and as their heart is still pumping, even though you've whacked them in the head, the heart's still going, it'll push all that blood out so that when you fillet it, now you have a cleaner fillet. You don't have blood
down that
all
lateral line and down that kidney line, which is usually full of blood, will be pretty clean. So,
but I think we've fairly well covered fall fishing. But I mean, the thing is, guys, go out there, have fun. I do want to say one last thing is wear that personal flotation device, that PFD, because we've had some people die here in Fremont County where we live this summer because they didn't wear one. And, you may think that you're too manly for it or, too tough or whatever. But when that wing comes up and you have problems out there, it can get real scary real fast. And so just plan, have a personal flotation device. You may say, I'm a really good driver on my boat. Well, maybe somebody else isn't, and they hit your boat going 60, 70 miles an hour, the bass boat, and then you end up in the water without a life jacket unconscious, you're going to drown. So just make sure to wear it. That's a shout out to search and rescue, because we were talking about that the other day, that, you know, if people would just wear their personal flotation device and do what they need to do to keep themselves and their kids safe, it would be a lot better. So just be careful out there and go enjoy the fall fishing. It's so much fun. That is the
hard one for me. Now, when I'm water skiing, 100%, I've got a nice body glove, you know, jacket that I like to wear. Now, when I'm driving the boat, I'd like to have my jacket off, but I think you've convinced me to get one of those kind of inflatable PFDs, the horseshoe collar one, so that when we are doing some stuff like that, it's not intrusive, it's not in the way. That is the one thing I'll say with a water ski style life jacket when I'm trying to fish. It's just not, it's cumbersome. So,
but the technology has gotten to the point now that it's easy. So just wear one. Make your kids wear one.
I think they have some fanny pack style ones now too.
I don't know, they might, but
I think they do.
All the professional bass fishermen, walleye fishermen, you'll see that they've got this little thing kind of draped around their shoulders. Those are great because they don't get in the way. They don't make you too hot, just like the old style. You know, you die in those things because it gets hot. But yeah, just be safe out there. That's the biggest thing. But go out and enjoy the fall fishing. I mean, to me, it is the best time of year to go, and I know I'll be out there.
Hard water fishing's coming. You got like 90 days of good open water. Go get an extra day of fishing in. Patrick and I require that you go fishing. So you can tell your spouses, you can tell your boss, sorry, David and Patrick said I had to go fish while the water's still liquid.
Yep, exactly. So ladies, tell your husbands I'm going fishing. Husbands, tell your ladies I'm going fishing. Just go have fun. All right, guys, until next time. Thanks again for listening to the RadCast Outdoors podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed the show. If so, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this podcast and subscribe, share, and give us a 5-star rating, which really helps other people find the show. You can find all of our shows, recipes, giveaways, videos, and much more at radcastoutdoors.com. While you're there, please help support the show by purchasing a RadCast Outdoors shirt or hat. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a RadCast community on Facebook called RadCast Nation, and we'd love for you to join in the conversation there. And of course, please help support our sponsors who make this show possible. Thank you again to PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings. Until next time, get out there and enjoy the outdoors.